Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you, and you'll be joining us from everywhere, and I'm so glad about that. We're coming on at a special time today because I have a special guest, who's going to talk to us about an issue that is at issue and has been really maybe since time immemorial. What to do about this powerful entity called a woman, right? And how do we control her? How do we care for her? How do we love her? And in this day and age, how can we save women? Sadly, in America, America stands alone amongst industrialized nations because when a woman is diagnosed as being pregnant, for many it's a thrilling event, for some not so, but either way it hits you, guess what? It's a death sentence. We have the highest rate of maternal mortality, white, black, indigenous, everybody on the spectrum in the industrialized world. And unlike men, when little girls move into womanhood, and we have a critical event called our menses, and I'm going to put it that way because we want to keep the conversation elevated. If people care about you, they sit you down and they let you know that you're moving into womanhood and you no longer can go see a pediatrician. Everything about your health care has to shift. When a girl becomes a woman, you could be 9, you could be 10, you could be 8. But there's a shift that occurs. And so for those of us who need assistance, healthcare, heaven knows, is extremely expensive in this country. It's the primary driver, the number one driver of bankruptcies, even when you have the best of insurance. But a lot of people we need help. We need assistance. Most poor people work hard every day, but they need a bridge that helps them to stay healthy. And even that's not enough. Let us be very clear. Medicaid and Medicare are systems that are woefully underfunded, but they're what we have. Certainly that is until the signing into law of the big, beautiful bill. We've never seen our healthcare system decimated to such an extent in our history since we started really trying to take care of people. $1 trillion has been moved from our healthcare system into the Pentagon, which has failed 7 successive audits. We've had a massive transfer, yet again, of wealth to the wealthiest amongst us. And so women are left flapping in the wind, and in steps the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court made a momentous decision that is absolutely devastating and decimating. And so I wanted to bring on someone who has pioneered a new area of law. I'm so proud of this woman. I happen to call her a dear sister friend, but she's also one of the world's foremost experts in health law. Indeed, the intersection of health policy, health care, policy, economics, sociology, all of that is something that she has combined to help create and pioneer a field called health law. And so she talks about the criminalization of childbearing for women. You have got to get her book. And it's something that I've read several times. It's Policing the Womb. Policing the Womb. Because that is what's been happening to women. In slavery, African American women were policed. Indigenous women have been policed. Our wombs have been policed. White women have had their wombs policed. They're policed. Now, will they be cared for? What will happen if Planned Parenthood is taken off the table for women? Planned Parenthood provides a whole range of services. And at the risk of being redundant, Dr. Michelle Goodwin, professor of law at Georgetown University, School of Law, they have you wearing a lot of hats over there because we really do need to have the whole area of health law. We need to have it expanded. We need to have it studied because women all over the world, American women are doing better than most women all over the world. Most women all over the world have no agency. And the healthcare services that are given to them are killing them. So let's start here. What is Planned Parenthood? Before I get to the SCOTUS decision, I think there are a lot of myths, Professor Goodwin, that are held about Planned Parenthood. People think that you only get there to terminate a pregnancy. And this is something that you take personally because you have a very personal, very powerful personal narrative. But everybody approaches this from our own story. I've got uh, a great grandmother who raised me and grandmothers who had children out of wedlock. So they brought into my own life the pain of that experience and the fear when I was moving into young womanhood. They didn't want that to happen to me, right? Um, so I want you to tell me, what is Planned Parenthood and why do we need it?
Well, let me start first by thank you for inviting me on your show, which is very important. The show that bringing progressive thought to what is happening in the United States, bringing thought to what is happening in the United States and around the world is critically important, especially at a time in which there are bans on books. Books are being burned and banned, and librarians are under attack. And so it's very important to have elevated factual conversations. You've asked about what is Planned Parenthood, and let me move back even from there, which is to say, well, why is it that we actually need facilities that provide care at all? And who originally were the people that provided care? And maybe I'll start there if you don't mind, because we've become so distorted and from understanding how healthcare happens. During the period, the antebellum period, the period of American slavery, the majority of reproductive health care was performed by women almost exclusively, 100%. But Black women performed about 50% of that. I start off with that to say that by the turn of the 20th century, the early 1900s, about 1% of healthcare was being performed by women. And so when we look at that, and people have come to see that as normal, that it's men who should be involved with women's bodies. And if you think about that within a broader historical context, can you imagine that 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, that there were men with white lab coats and stethoscopes telling women and girls, open your legs so that I can help you? No, of course there were women who were involved in the care for women. Of course, but we've become so distanced from that there is this understanding that the only way that women and girls can actually get to some understanding about their bodies has to necessarily come from men. And historically, it makes no sense. Historically, it didn't happen, but it did happen under a kind of political policing of women coming out of that period after slavery, looking to shut all of that down. And really thinking about the story of Planned Parenthood is also a part of that. For all that there has been in terms of criticism of Planned Parenthood and its founding, the fact that it was founded by a woman is part of what draws scrutiny. So Planned Parenthood is an organization that's been around, its formal name now and before, about 100 years, right, of providing care for women. And the specific focus was poor women. It was about helping women who were dying in childcare, or women who were having literally 8, 9, 10 kids and couldn't afford them, living in tenements where there was just one bedroom or two. And so all of it was about healthcare, and it was about contraceptive care.
Wait a
Now,
minute. In that time, I mean, people were dying of diseases we don't even hear of anymore because public hygiene, public health was not what it is. You did not have sewage systems, right? You
there
did
were
not.
children dying in the streets.
Yeah.
There were children. We didn't have hospital. Look, what people don't really understand is that there was a time in the United States in which there was virtually zero care for poor children. Poor children were working 40, 60, 80-hour work weeks. We're talking about 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, and then literally dying in the streets. when we did not have sophisticated systems of sewage and sanitation, when we had no environmental protection agency, there were literally sewage in the streets and poor children out in the streets. And this is also that disconnect from history, and this disconnect from an elevated conversation such that people don't know this. But getting us to these modern times of Planned Parenthood, let me share with your listeners just a few things. It's become part of a political rhetoric that what Planned Parenthood is trying to do is to stop people from ever having children. What Planned Parenthood is doing is trying to attack Black women and attack women of color. Let's be clear that Dr. King received in 1966 Humanitarian of the Year Award from Planned Parenthood and wrote a brilliant speech. And in that brilliant speech, which was presented by his wife, I often say that he was off being arrested somewhere, but Coretta Scott King, his wife, Mrs. King, delivered that speech. And she started off with saying it was one of the proudest days in her life to be a woman. And his speech began with what has tremendous resonance today in his words. And he said that if a group of aliens came from outer space and landed in the United States, they would say that this is a nation governed by insane men. And he started off his speech that way because he said that what was taking shape, oppressing from women, denying from women the opportunity to plan their own families, his words, Dr. King said that that was cruel. He said that there was no way to sustain a just, a civil, a kind, a caring society where women were not able to control their own bodies and control their reproductive futures. He said that it was cruel for a child to be born into a family where it was not wanted, where it could not be cared for, where the parents could not afford to care for it. He said that the country was shifting from a time of an agrarian nation where it was not unusual to have 9 or 10 kids to take care of a farm. He said that that was not sustainable, inhumane to bring 10 kids into a 1-bedroom tenement in a city because people were migrating from the farms into the city. So he said that that was something that was cruel. Prescott Bush, who was the father of George H.W. Bush, the first Bush president, he was treasurer of Planned Parenthood. And so if we understand this history of Planned Parenthood and what it was about at a time in which people were dying, providing this critical health care, well, guess what? That's what it's been doing. Only about 3% of what Planned Parenthood does is pregnancy termination related. And I think we ought to talk about that. And then also let's get to that because that is important. But what is this other care that's been provided by Planned Parenthood over all these years? Well, that relates to, and quite seriously, matters of breast cancer screening, ovarian cancer screening, cervical cancer screenings, vaccination, and guess what? Prenatal care, postnatal care, and also screenings for sexually transmitted infections and diseases. All of that as everyday procedures, everyday healthcare that folks can get at Planned Parenthood. And Santita, I know you know this, but we're going to tell your listeners as well. We know that in the places where Planned Parenthood and other clinics are under attack, the local cities, the local counties, and the state are not providing that care. These are the only places, the Planned Parenthoods and these clinics are literally the only lifeline, healthcare line in so many parts of the United States for working class women, and for poor women and girls and teenagers as well.
And college students.
And college students. Look, Santita, and here's some things that we want to think about. For all of those people who've heard inaccuracies, who've heard things that are just flat out not true, that what's taking shape at Planned Parenthoods is that they are influencing children to do things, to be intimately engaged and whatnot. Let's just be clear that in the United States, teenagers lead, by all accounts, far beyond their counterparts in France and England and Germany, et cetera, with sexually transmitted diseases that later turn into cancers. Far outweigh. So for all of this clutch the pearls, Children in the United States, young people in the United States right now are poised for dangerous cancers that could lead to their death in their 20s and their 30s because people are not paying attention to the kinds of health care that they need and also the kinds of conversations that they need, which sadly is another prong with important literatures, important classes being taken out of high schools. In other parts of the world, young people are learning about their bodies because we are biological beings. So we will have a child dissect a frog or a toad and teach them more about the frog and the toad and not about their bodies. You've got young people in the United States today who don't know how pregnancy come about, how sexually transmitted diseases come about, which is then why we're leading all of the industrialized world and even beyond that in infectious diseases involving teenagers and sex.
Well, and that's why I wanted to build the frame for this June 2025 decision from the Supreme Court, the Medina versus Planned Parenthood of what is it, of the Southeast. Which
Because,
happens
yes.
to be part of the country. Look, there are pockets of poverty everywhere, quite frankly. So let's not stereotype and believe and buy into the myth, should I say, the mythology that the poorest part of the United States is in the South. There are pockets of poverty everywhere. They're in
Everywhere.
the city. They're everywhere. What happened in this decision, and why is it so consequential to this discussion?
Well, in this decision, it comes out of an executive order by the governor in South Carolina to remove, essentially, the efforts are to remove Planned Parenthood from being able to receive government funding, whether it's through the Medicaid programs or whether it is through Title X. And if you don't mind, I think a little bit of background information is helpful there. So, Title X and Medicaid, these are part of the New Deal of the Civil Rights Movement, essentially. Title X provides healthcare services, reproductive healthcare services for the poorest of Americans. And it was shepherded through Congress by Republicans, by George H.W. Bush. Richard Nixon said that this is basic common sense, basic healthcare when you're providing access to matters like contraception and these kinds of screenings that we've talked about. Then why wouldn't you want for people in your country to be able to have access to that care? For Medicaid, many people don't understand that it was part of a trifecta, a trilogy. We had the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and then here is this medical civil rights movement, which was critically important. Also in 1966, Dr. King gives a talk in Chicago amongst a group of doctors. And at that talk, of all of the things that Dr. King had experienced and worked on, of all of them, he said that the most grave injustice of all was that involving inequities in health. And he said, because it could lead to people's death. So you think about Dr. King in 1966 and all that he had seen. There was a march on Washington. He's been arrested so many times, right? Leading people to try to vote. And he absolutely understands racial discrimination in education and housing and employment and accommodations and all of those things. And he said, of the absolute worst of them happens to be in health. So there is this trifecta with Medicaid and this pushing forward an agenda and connected to it. And this is what's key in this case, because connected to it is this idea that you may be of limited economic means, but you get to choose your provider. Now, why would that be important for the people that are being advocated for? It's all Americans, and all Americans who have limited resources. But the distinction between having limited resources in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s and being Black and being white are very different things, as Black people are dying literally on the front steps of hospitals that would only serve white patients. Let's be clear, while people may remember segregated buses, segregated water fountains, segregated bathrooms, there were segregated hospitals. And at segregated hospitals, they refused to treat Black patients. And so with the federal government saying, we will provide funding for the people who have the lowest economic means, and you get to choose. You don't have to spend your money with people who will not be concerned about your healthcare, about your survival, about the dignity of your healthcare. Let's think about this, especially since this is the conversation that is about women's health and reproductive healthcare. The Mississippi appendectomy. How do we come to learn about the Mississippi appendectomy, which is no appendectomy at all? It is the coercive forced sterilization of Black women that begins to take shape when Black women begin demanding civil rights access. And it's Fannie Lou Hamer who tells us about this Mississippi appendectomy because she had been coercively sterilized. And then we learn about all of these thousands and thousands of Black women and girls as young as 10 years old, coercively sterilized, right, in a healthcare system. The brilliance about the choice that was provided as part of this Medicaid legislation was that you don't have to go to somebody who tried to sterilize you or who did. Now with the Supreme Court decision, that's been taken away. And this history is critically important because people don't know about it.
As we move into this space in which Medicare and Medicaid cuts are about to really hit us, they're about to become real. What do you see happening? Because I have to reiterate, working people get Medicaid. I mean, that's
Yes.
work requirements are.
Oh, absolutely.
It's cruel and it's redundant because we know during the pandemic, the frontline workers are poor people who were on that bus stop at 2, 3, 4 in the morning. They were at work at 4, 5, 6, 7. They were working the 8 and 12-hour shifts without PPEs and all of that. So I want to know from you, just how does this shake out? I mean, what is going to happen if in South Carolina, if in rural Illinois, because they're already closing clinics here, they're closing Planned Parenthood clinics. What will be the fallout of that for these people who are working, for the teenagers, for the girl, for the child who's been abused, or the child who might have a parent who's so repressed that they don't talk about the birds and the bees? I mean, there's just so much.
This is such an important conversation, and I'm so happy to be having it with you. I think that your listeners probably know just how deep our sisterhood and friendship goes. This is, it saddens me because, as you've mentioned, girls, look, in the 3 years since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, which was a nearly 50-year precedent, it was unheard of that the Supreme Court ever takes a right away, a fundamental human right like that. I mean, it was just extreme, especially given that only a few years before that, the Supreme Court, under a different composition of the court, in a decision written by Justice Breyer, the court acknowledged that women in the United States are 14 times more likely to die carrying a pregnancy to term than by having an abortion.
Mm.
And so when you have a Supreme Court then that says we're just going to wipe away your ability to make these decisions in your life, especially given that about 30% of pregnancies will end in miscarriage or stillbirth, which can be life-threatening situations, which we've seen in the horrors that have taken place since Dobbs. But as part of the horrors that have taken place since Dobbs, and we'll talk about what's happening with Medicaid and Medicare, there have been doctors who've been coming forward to tell legislators, look, you don't want to impose these kinds of draconian anti-abortion laws. Let me tell you about my 8-year-old pregnant patient. Let me tell you about my 9-year-old pregnant patient. In Louisiana alone, there have been since Dobbs at least nearly a handful of hearings where there have been doctors that have come forward to explain to the legislator that they have had these patients this young in medical crisis after rape and pregnancy, Don't force these little girls to go through what will be devastating if they survive. And what is surviving when then it might mean future infertility for the rest of your life, where it may mean, yes.
No. I'm trying to conceive of an 8-year-old being pregnant, because the trauma that an adult body has to endure, has to withstand in pregnancy, the closest a woman comes to death in,
Yes.
in childbirth. So an 8 or 9-year-old, I mean, are you serious?
The, you know, yes. Yes, serious, with no exceptions for rape or incest. And at the same time, can you imagine as doctors are presenting these cases before lawmakers, and then out of that same legislature, you have lawmakers that propose the death penalty against doctors and also the patients if they terminate the pregnancy.
Yeah.
So you have lawmakers who will listen to that and say, well, but I have the grand idea that somehow if this person, this child, this woman, then actually achieves an abortion, that they should be subjected to the death penalty. I mean,
Mhm.
the cruelty one cannot deny, even though I think it is very hard for people to see. And so you've asked, then what does this future look like? So we can't look at this future with regard to Medicaid and Medicare in the abstract of what the Supreme Court has otherwise been doing, or in the absence of the Dobbs decision, where we know what pregnancy can look like in the United States. There's been this idea that pregnancy is idyllic.
Mhm.
And I think that's largely because you have women and girls who experience it. And so their experiences of pain and horror and trauma are not taken into account. There's this idea that women and girls should always be happy associated with their pregnancies. It's just not realistic. We don't expect the same of men. We somehow expect that a person who has been raped and brutalized and then forced by these states to carry pregnancies to term should just suck it up, should grit their teeth and bear it. We don't expect the same of men. You know, it's a very interesting thing if you think about and you mentioned the funding going towards military and war. We'd
Mhm.
never tolerate the raping of a man. It happens, men get
Mhm.
raped. But can you imagine if our soldiers said that while they were fighting somewhere in the world, the male soldiers, it seems that, when women come forward and say that they've been sexually assaulted within our military, we pay very little attention to that. But can
Absolutely.
you imagine if men in our military around the world, that there was a campaign, while we capture you, we rape you? Oh, it would be seen as so incredibly offensive. There would be no room for grace that would be given to a nation where that was carried out on American soldiers. Somehow in our nation, we think that that is okay for women to endure this sort of suck it up and bear through it. But I'll tell you that in the wake of all of this tragedy that's unfolded since the Dobbs decision and what's unfolded just in the last week, it means a future where there will be Americans who will be harmed. Some may very well survive because people strangely do, but we have to understand what surviving looks like.
Mhm.
We have people in the United States who lose limbs. They have to be amputated because they didn't have medical care on time, right? This is what happens. You got diabetes and you weren't able to get it treated. Well, this is what can happen. If you don't have the reproductive health care that you need because the Planned Parenthood isn't there in the other places, and you could have had your breast cancer detected, well, guess what? Then hopefully you might survive that breast cancer, but you may very well not because it goes untreated. Or what about ovarian cancer and cervical cancer? Because the local hospital wasn't there. There was no city hospital, no county hospital, no state hospital, and the Planned Parenthood clinic was forced to close. Well, it's our nation saying sorry about that, because what's part of the delusion of all of this is that there's a Planned Parenthood on one side of the street, and on the other side of the street is this beautiful, luxurious hospital where people can get dignified care and treatment. That's not the case. We know that there are health deserts throughout the United States. And what that means is that not for 20, 50, 100, 200 miles is there a place in which you can be treated. And that's the reality in the United States.
And Dr. Goodwin, with the cuts to healthcare, we're going to see massive closings of hospitals, not just in rural America, right? But in underserved communities. Already, you've spent a lot of time at the DePaul University School of Law. She's lectured at Harvard, everybody's fellow there and all of that. She's one of the world's most respected, and she's really a founder of this space, in this health law space. So she knows from whence she speaketh. We see this is going to happen in urban America. There is a hospital that is not too far from me that my brother went to when he broke his arm when he was a little boy. He waited, Jonathan must have been about 7. He waited for several hours with a broken arm. When my father got back to town, it made Jet magazine because he was so furious. And my father, he has a very long fuse. You know him well. My father has the greatest respect for you and he adores you like a daughter. He went into that hospital and said, "You have got to be kidding. My child waited here in pain for hours. What are you all running here?" Well, sadly, the saying in this neighborhood is that if you go there, you are going to die. But 15 minutes from there is Northwestern Hospital. Oh no, it's the University of Chicago, and 10, 15 more minutes north of there is the Northwestern Hospital. And then 10 minutes from there, Rush. There is healthcare. It's just poor people and working people don't have access to it. The people who work in the hospitals don't have access to the hospitals that they work in. And as we're looking at, our girls are so vulnerable. When I think of Indigenous people who are living in their communities on these reservations, because their health outcomes are worse than Black people's. They're doing work. They are doing worse than everybody. I wonder where we're going. What did James Carville say, that we're looking at a mass extinction event? And when I saw this decision, I couldn't help but wonder if that's what's going to happen to so many of our girls and women.
Well, so let's be clear with the kind of conversation that you and I have been having. While it is very important that we look at the demographics of what has taken shape in Black communities, especially as Black women are 4 times more likely, 3.5 times more likely nationally than white counterparts to die during pregnancy. And then that's just nationally. In some communities, they're 10 times more likely, 15 times more likely when you drill down. But to go back to your opening monologue for the show, is that this is dangerous for everybody. Is for everybody. White women don't get a break out of this. And over the last 3 years, what we've seen is the crisis in Texas with courageous white women coming forward, courageous white women of means coming forward. I mean, this is how shocking and brazen and inhumane and unjust and inequitable this has been, which is that you have white women of means from Texas who have been pleading on national and international news for help. You have white women who've experienced sepsis, near-death experiences. I was before Congress with Amanda Zarowski testifying as she was sharing the horrors of her experience and trying to figure out how she would leave the state of Texas to get the health care that she needed. And we're talking about in cases where people wanted their pregnancies.
Well, Maria Rodriguez here is talking about the experiments that were performed on Puerto Rican women when they were.
That's absolutely right. Look, we're talking about Puerto Rican women, Indigenous women, white women, Asian women being banned from coming into the United States under the idea in the Page Act that they would be sex workers. I mean, there's so many ways in which we've stigmatized, stereotyped, not treated with dignity the lives of women, that no category of women has been spared. It happens to be that there's a period of time in which white women had the means to try to get to someplace else to get the health care that they needed, and quietly. But let's be clear, with what is taking shape today, it is a threat even in states that are considered the blue states, the progressive states. right? Because when you have federal laws that say we'll just withhold our funding, that withholding is not wink, wink, nod, nod. This only applies in our red Southern conservative states. No, not at all. When the federal government says that what we want to do is take back or condition the resources that we have spread out, that's all across the country. So where people believed I can escape this space to go someplace else, the effort is to try to make it difficult everywhere. You know, we had in our spring edition of the Ms. magazine, we looked at California and the efforts, even in a progressive state like California, which has constitutional amendments to protect healthcare, constitutional amendments to protect reproductive healthcare, and so forth. There has been an unyielding effort to try to dismantle that, not internally by people in the state of California, but through external forces coming into California.
You know, before you go, I want to get a final word from you because I could keep you all day, but that's also personal. I have to just break cover just right quick. This is one of my dearest friends in life. If I say any more, it will make me cry and my eyelashes will fall off. You know, I don't like that, you guys. But I wanted to bring up Attorney Terry O'Neill, the president emeritus of the National Organization of Women. She was so excited when she heard that she would be preceded by you. She said, I've been with her before. She is brilliant, terrific. But you know, one of the things that I've appreciated about Terry O'Neill's presidency of NOW was her pushing intersectionality. I mean, really helping white women to understand the buy-in that they had on everybody's problems, but because she did a carve out when she was president to come to either the NOW convention was leading into the push convention or leading out of it. So she was always setting aside, as busy as she was, a couple of days, as you recall, Dr. Goodwin, coming to the convention, prioritizing the push convention, because she said, we have to make our presence known. We have to have these alliances. And when this June decision came down, she said, you don't know. People need to know how consequential this is. And Dr. Goodwin, people will die. And it's unnecessary. The Yale study said 51,000 people because of these cuts, because of the big, beautiful bill, they're going to die. And that's a conservative estimate, everyone. That's just a projection. We're not looking at what's really going to happen here. Because there's so many women who find little lumps and bumps and they ignore them because they're like, I can't afford to deal with this. You know, I can't afford it. Psychologically, I don't want to wrap my mind around it. But financially, I can't afford it. So you know what? Look, I'll let the Lord take over. And I'm not diminishing religion because I am a religious woman. But they just say I just have to hand myself over to the fates because no one's going to help me. And that is what is so frightening to me. And what should be a deeply personal decision, whatever you decide, when you find that you are pregnant, it's a deeply personal decision, whatever decision that you arrive at. I've spoken to several friends of mothers of my friends, a couple of them who said, you know, I was having trouble in my marriage and I couldn't have a child at that time because there was just too much going on. And I didn't know where we were going to go. And this was 40 years ago, 50 years ago. And because talk about a death sentence when a woman divorces. Her economic circumstances change overnight. So I wanted Terry O'Neill to respond to you. And then if you don't mind, Dr. Goodwin, I certainly want you can stay as long as you wish, but I know that you're busy. I wanted you to give some concluding remarks at least, but I wanted Attorney Terry O'Neill to respond to what she has been hearing from you because her remarks have been so consequential and they resonate so profoundly with things that you say every day. Attorney Terry O'Neill. Oh, you're still on mute. It's okay. The most brilliant things are said when we. I do it all the time.
Thank you, Santita. I really appreciate it. Dr. Goodwin, it is so nice to see you again. You are truly one of my heroes. I just can't tell you how much I appreciate the extraordinary work you do. You know, the really carefully researched, brilliantly, beautifully, you know, collected all of the information. It's so important because you're right. Many people will die. First of all, the South Carolina decision, and then the big bullcrap bill that purports to defund Planned Parenthood. That part's been put on hold temporarily. We don't know what's going to happen with it, but you know, this effort to defund Planned Parenthood is squarely aimed at women, at preventing women from getting appropriate medical health care for reproductive health care. And of course, it is, as Henry Hyde himself said so many decades ago, I would like to stop all women from accessing abortion, but the people I can reach, the only people I can reach are poor women. So it is targeted at women, but the people they can reach are poor women, women who, right now, it's women who use Medicaid to get to get reproductive health care. But in targeting women, they are, of course, also sweeping in men, and I mean cisgender men. Something like 11% of men nationwide have used Planned Parenthood for reproductive health care. 32% of women nationwide have used Planned Parenthood for their reproductive health care. So it sweeps in men, it sweeps in transgender individuals, it sweeps in non-binary people, it sweeps in a lot of people, although it's targeted at women. And so that, I think everybody really needs to understand what the intention of this Supreme Court decision is, and what the intention of this part of the tax bill that just passed is, the tax and budget bill. The other thing that I think is really important is the suppression of information about the deaths that are occurring, about the almost the near-death experiences that are occurring. We're hearing some of it out of Texas. I live in Tennessee now. I am not finding any access to information out of Tennessee. There's a so-called commission that's supposed to be covering this. I've gone online on a number of occasions trying to find out, well, what do they know, and what do they look at, and what is their process, and how do they make this stuff public? I get nothing. And I'm quite positive that in other abortion ban states, the information is being systematically suppressed. So it's really a dire situation for us right now, and it's all the more scary because our attention is so focused on the coming police state. You know, we already live in a police state for many communities. Certainly, the Black and brown communities here in Nashville were already in a police state. But now, with something like $45 billion allocated just to ICE, not to the for-profit prisons, they're getting their own money, but $45 billion to ICE to serve as basically a secret police. These are ICE officers who do not have a badge number, who do not have a name on when they come and claim to be ICE. There have been multiple occasions that I've heard of where thieves, right, impersonators, put on something they claim to be ICE, and they just mug you, and they kidnap you, and so that's going on because ICE is being allowed to operate as a secret police force. So with all of our attention on that and the precarity, and of course that is aimed at brown communities, something that really concerns me is this systematic cutting off of access to reproductive health care is not going to get the political oxygen that it needs, because the information itself is being suppressed, and we've got all of these other things that are happening. So,
but I think that is why, as I conclude the part of the conversation with you, Dr. Goodwin, that's why your book is so, no pun intended, the the title is just pregnant with so much meaning. You know, policing the womb, invisible women, and the criminalization of motherhood, not pregnancy, motherhood, invisible women, policing the womb. I want you to get that book, everybody. You should also get Body Parts. Okay. You really need to understand that. She's the author of 6 other books. But get this Policing the Womb, Invisible Women, and the criminalization of motherhood, because it goes beyond pregnancy. It's the criminalization of motherhood. And perhaps I have a soft spot for this because I have 2 grandmothers who were unwed teen mothers, who were poor. And they had precious little. There were no institutions to which they could turn. My father's mother had to turn down the opportunity to go to college because, of course, she was a fallen woman. She couldn't go. And then, because she wasn't going to hide her pregnancy, because that's not what she was going to do. Because my great grandmother wasn't going to send her away. And she said, "You did this. You're going to have this baby, and we're going to take care of it." And there we go. And then I have another grandmother who was orphaned at 11 or 12 and had her first child at 14. And then another one at 16, another one at 17. Fortunately, she was able to get married at 18 and establish some stability. But I know the emotional scars. But I know the fear that was struck in their hearts when my parents fell pregnant with me in college. And there was just such fear. What's going to happen to my daughter? My daughter's options are gone. That was my maternal grandmother. My father said, "No, we're getting married. That's it. No guns to my head. I was going to marry you anyway. So we're just hastening this along." And he calls me this guest of honor at their wedding. But look, my parents have talked about this. But I see the pain. I see women who didn't have options. And I happen to know from an op-ed piece, and it just breaks my heart, I can't really talk about it, what Michelle has been through. And I'd love for you to come back and talk about that, because I knew you were emancipated very young, but I didn't know the abuse that you endured that made you say, "I have got to stand up for myself if no one else will do it." And here I go. It's just a lot. Because so many of us have our backs against the wall.
Yes.
And no one is standing up for these girls and these teenagers and these young women and just women, because you're so vulnerable. Even when you have materials at your disposal, you still need your girls. You need your options. And so many of us don't have them. So many of us have doctors who don't care, who don't really understand just how vulnerable we are. Look, you haven't lived until someone tells you they think you've got cancer. That happened to me. And it was a woman doctor who saved me, a Black woman, who said, "No, we're going to slow down because you don't think you have this, right? Okay, we're going to keep on going." It took us 2.5 years to figure it out. I said, "I'm not going to let you all give me chemo and you don't know exactly what this is. You're joking? This is crazy. I can't do that." There's so much, and I have access to really some of the best health care. I can only imagine what happens to others. So when I see this, it's frightening to me. I see these girls going into these schools. I don't know where they're coming from. I don't know what they're going home to. Michelle, how are we going to save the women? See, they're killing the mothers in Gaza because they don't want them to bring another generation forward. That's what we do. We did it here. The Mississippi appendectomy. We keep on doing this. How do we save our daughters?
Well, let me say this. Again, thank you for opening this conversation, which is not the first that you've had. And so it's really continuing the conversation. And Harry, it's always just wonderful to be with you. Your leadership has made a tremendous difference along the arc towards justice for women and girls, and also for folks who are LGBTQ, right? You know, that inclusiveness, that embrace, pushing folks forward to understand that women does not mean white women. It means all women. There's a time in our country where that's the default, where that's what women means, and you pushed against that. So thank you for doing that. You educated generations to get them started on a path. You know, what we have to do is make sure that we do not become numb to all of this, that it does not become normalized in our minds. Santita, when you were mentioning your grandmothers and out of wedlock births, what's interesting about that is the kind of stereotyping and stigmatization that then they experience. But if we were to only look a couple generations before them, that's what this country imposed upon them. You look at these advertisements from the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, Black breeding wenches. What is a breeding wench? Breeding wenches for sale, 10 to 12 years old, right? You know, there's this way in which we gaslight people. Yeah. Where we say, why weren't you better? Why didn't you do better? When in fact, the muscle that has been used is to deny people their dignity, their rights, their autonomy, right? It's absolute gaslighting that you see on one hand, this idea of what perfected motherhood is, sit back and take care of your children. Oh, but not if you need government assistance. We want to see you out there working, right? And then you're out there working. And I want to think about my great friend, Dorothy Roberts. So, okay, but you're out there working. Something happens to your child. Oh, you were neglectful because you should have been home with your child. I mean, we're constantly picking at women with such that they can never get it right. Yeah. Why did this happen? You should have been there watching your child, but you just said, I need to be out there working and giving me no grace to be there with my child. All of that. We weaponize people's poverty against them. Most of the incidents in which children are taken away from their mothers happens to be on matters associated with poverty, not matters that are associated with abuse and that I didn't love you and I wanted to treat you ill or wrong. And so I'd highly commend Dorothy Roberts' book, Torn Apart. There's a chapter in her book, which is something to the effect, titled something to the effect that they separate our children at the Bronx border too.
Wow.
Right. So, you know, what we have to do is fight against this notion that any of this makes sense, that any of this is just. We have to see the dignity in others, because there will be a narrative that tells us that we should not, and that we too should be involved in stereotyping, stigmatizing, demeaning people. And we have to fight, folks have to fight against that, and they have to care for each other. I want to close with this, Santita, and thank you so much for inviting me on your show. One of the things that we've seen is how Black women vote. And I only wish that networks would actually pay attention to that. Instead, after an election, it's let's talk with white men in diners. Let's go to talk with white women in the auditoriums of schools. Let's do all of these different things. And it's never about Black women. Why did 96% of you in 2016 not vote for Donald Trump? Why wasn't it in 2024? Why was it 92% of you that saw something? What did you see?
What did you see?
Here's the thing. Because there is so much stereotyping and demeaning of Black women, there's never been an appreciation for their constitutionalism, for their views on democracy, for their views on the body politic in the United States. And what group? These are groups that are like Black women have been invested, and they have seen it. They've seen it from the 1500s, 1600s, how law works in this country. They have seen how the courts work. They've seen local government. They've seen federal government. They understand what gaslighting is. They understand what it means to care for other people's children with love and dignity and respect, and to hope for the best of those children. And that's what I'm talking about in white people's homes, right? We don't take any of that into account in the United States with saying that these are folks that, regardless of economic means, right? Because that's also very interesting.
Mhm.
You're going to have Black women, whether they happen to be working class or have PhDs, be able to see, articulate, and think and say, okay, I think this is the path that goes forward.
Mhm.
And we need to do more work in our country with appreciating the value of their political and economic thought in this country and what that could do for us. But that to me, altogether, is part of this sense of caring for others, because Black women cared about people's children being locked in cages. Black women cared about children locked in cages being denied soap and toothpaste. Black women didn't care whether it happened to be that they were from Venezuela, Ecuador, Mexico, etc. Black women didn't draw those lines.
Mhm.
Black women said none of them should be in cages. When Roy Moore was running for Senate in Alabama, Black women said, though he did not target Black girls, he targeted little white girls, but you should not be in the Senate, Roy Moore,
Mhm.
given what you did,
Mhm.
right? It's that kind of integrity and dignity in going to the polls that people in the United States can learn from. And it's an intergenerational legacy and thought. So, with that, I've got to leave you, but I am so grateful to have been part of this conversation.
Well, I will tell you, I appreciate your brilliance and your dedication, and thank you for really taking, you know, for following the directive that you got from above. This was a field that really did not exist. And you said, no, we need some space. Something in my experience that shows me that what I've experienced needs to be codified. And when you write it down and when you back it up with data, when you measure things out, people have to pay attention to you. And I thank you for shining a light on the invisible women. Thank you for that. Policing the womb, everybody. Invisible Women and the Criminalization of Motherhood. It's a book that you must get. You're going to become a better person having read it. You will. I love you, Dr. Michelle Goodwin, my
Love
dear
you back.
friend. You
Thank
have
you so
no
much.
idea how much I can tell you, Dr. Goodwin and Attorney Terry O'Neill. In times when I and when my family's backs have been against the wall, these women have shown up when it was not popular to do so. And for that, I'm forever in your debt. I love you both so much. And thank you for all that you have done for the least of these. The people who rule the world because we rock the cradles. Really. At the end of the day, when your back is against the wall, who do you call out for? Mama. Don't ever forget that. That mama energy will save the world. We're going to make it right. I am Santita Jackson, AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. God bless you, everybody.